Good afternoon and welcome to the full Scottish on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Corri Wilson and our guests this week are Maureen McGonigle from Scottish Women in Sport and Dr Philippa Whitford, MP for Central Ayrshire. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
So the first thing we're going to kick off today is about the Independence March, Philippa. An estimated 100,000 people attended Edinburgh yesterday, an amazing atmosphere. Were you there?
Oh, absolutely, I was there. It was an amazing atmosphere, as you say. I mean, you opened the curtains in the morning, saw a bright blue sky, and you thought, yeah, it's going to be a great day. Lots of families with kids, lots of dogs, it was just generally a fantastic gathering of people. And it was huge. I mean, it was very difficult to get it moving at the top of the Royal Mile. And I was near the front, but not at the front. I'd been down, we'd been through Holyrood Park, we'd had music, I'd done my speech. It took me about 45 minutes to get back out of the park, and people were still pouring down the hill. So I don't have any skills in working out how many thousands of people, but it was certainly enormous. And there were hundreds and hundreds who were lining the streets as we went down, and I've got the sore feet to prove I was there.
Do you get the sense that there's a growing support for the movement?
Well, I think, the marches are about energising people who support independence. I don't think you look at a march and think, oh, I'm going to change how I voted. I don't think that converts people. But people who are maybe thinking, when we're being told there's no appetite for independence, there's no interest in independence, I think for people to then see the size of the march, for people who bother to come, that they experience the atmosphere and the friendliness of the march, I think what it does is let people feel part of that movement. And the challenge then is taking the incredible energy that we saw in that group and then taking that out to be either campaigning through knocking doors and speaking to people, or just discussing Scotland's future with friends, neighbours, workmates, relatives. Because the problem is we are coming to this fork in the road. And we either control our own future or we're just going to get dragged about the place. And the march contributes to our energy to do that.
Do you think or what do you think rather has the biggest impact on a movement like independence growing? Is it austerity? Is it Brexit? Is it a mixture? Is there anything you think?
I think it's a mixture. I think probably the biggest driver, the biggest shock to people is Brexit. Because we voted very clearly 62% to remain. We've been utterly ignored since that time. And then on top of that, Brexit's being used to carry out the power grab. And they keep saying, well, we're not taking powers back from the Holyrood Parliament. But what it means is instead of the EU having the ultimate say on the structure of agriculture or fishing, and they are obsessed with level playing field, that power is going to Westminster, and they're not interested in level playing field at all. And the fact that they're going to be taking the ultimate control, not just over things like agriculture and fishing, but one that concerns me, over public procurement. They could simply come out with a ruling saying all NHS contracts have to be put out to tender. They did that to their own NHS. Now suddenly they have the power to do it to ours.
So what do you think, Philippa, in terms of what's next for the independence movement?
Well, I think a lot of hard work. I think the next year or so is critical before the end of transition. Obviously, we're hoping we're going to get transition and not be in a no deal crashing out in 6 months' time. That would be frightening for businesses, but also frightening for people who work in businesses. But I think before the end of 2020, Scotland has to have made its decision, and to me, if we decide that we're just staying with the UK, then that's fine. You accept, you're going to shut up, you'll sit in the boot of the car, you will never have any influence because we are less than 10% of the population, and therefore you just accept any decisions that England makes in the future. That's what we'll get. Or you say, no, actually we'd be safer in the driving seat making our own decisions, and obviously that's absolutely what I believe.
Yeah. Maureen, did you catch any footage of the march yesterday?
I did. I thought it was a real colourful explosion. And you know what I think when I think of the numbers and I think of the debate that goes around recently in terms of football and bringing numbers together and how they're going to police it and what problems are going to be, this march went off without a hitch, and it looks like everyone excuse me, it looks like everyone had a great day. So it's a celebration, I see it as, and I think Scotland should be proud of itself for doing that.
Yeah. So over to SNP Conference, Philippa. It starts today for the next 3 days. And we heard Nicola setting out our vision for an independent Scotland. What do we expect to hear over the next three days?
Well, I think there'll be a lot of discussion about where we go from here. It's not particularly that there'll be resolutions. I mean, people often say, there's no resolution on independence. Yeah, why would we be debating independence at an SNP conference? We already believe in that. But in actual fact, I think there'll be a lot of discussion around how we get there and where we go to. I mean, there are still too many people who are obsessed with the when. Yes, I think it has to be, within the next year or so. But it's not the when, it's the why, the way you convert people who voted no last time. And yes, there will be some who voted no because they believe in the United Kingdom in the way we believe in Scotland, and you're not going to change their minds. But there's lots of people who voted no for lots of reasons, and often it was fear. They voted for the status quo because that looked like the easy option. It's our job to convert them. And so I think there'll be a lot of discussion around Brexit, around this drive for a people's vote, around how we protect ourselves. Because between Brexit and the power grab, Scotland is in real danger going forward. So I think that's going to dominate, no matter what else we're talking about. I think those are going to be the themes that dominate.
Is there anything you're talking about? Have you planned?
Yeah, I'm on a panel later on today, which is talking about provision of free personal care, support for people, obviously through Frank's Law, that's going to be provided to people under 65 with degenerative conditions such as early dementia, MS, MND, and so on. But people in Scotland are often not aware of the fact that it is only Scotland that provides free personal care that can allow a lot of our elderly citizens to stay at home. These are these things that are never celebrated in our media, never talked about. And then tomorrow morning I'll be doing a fringe event on the healthcare situation in Palestine. I'm involved through Medical Aid for Palestinians. We're running a breast cancer project linking Scottish specialists with doctors in the West Bank and Gaza, and I was out there a couple of weeks ago, so I'll be doing that. We plug 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, get up early, eat your cornflakes, and then come to the Boysdale room.
Okay, good. There was a recent Survation poll that said that we were 20 points ahead as an SNP in Holyrood voting intentions, and if there was a general election tomorrow, we would gain 4 seats. What's your thoughts on?
Well, and there was another one recently that was actually even stronger than that. I think the new Scottish Tories, to be honest, have not covered themselves in glory. Some of them have, frankly, behaved pretty appallingly since being in Westminster, and certainly do not stand up for their constituents who voted Remain. Obviously, there are several of them that are in Jacob Rees-Mogg's European Research Group, so actually quite extreme Brexiteers. And many of the Labour MPs have actually been almost missing in action. They don't stand up for Scotland. It's always, attack the SNP rather than the Conservatives, and it's often denigrate Scotland rather than celebrate it, because somehow, celebrating anything Scottish sounds like you're pro-independence. So I think there are people who voted a different way in the last snap election who would change their minds, and I think people are beginning to realise that certainly within Westminster, it's only us that constantly speak up for Scotland on all issues. And obviously in Holyrood, it still is the fact that much as people try to make out that, the SNP, they're only obsessed with independence. In actual fact, if you looked at all of our progressive and social policies, despite having limited powers, we are delivering for Scotland. But you need the extra powers. I mean, a simple one, we can't make the real living wage the minimum wage. We promote it, we have the Fair Work Pledge, but we don't have the power to actually tackle poverty by saying you can't pay people below that. All of these powers still lie with Westminster.
And what's the mood of the group in Westminster, the SNP group? Is there a frustration?
There's a frustration in being in Westminster, and I mean we have seen the the dripping contempt for Scotland since the 14 vote, but particularly since the Brexit vote, and I think since the snap election, where they're now able to have Scottish Conservatives that will stand up and kind of talk Scotland down or whatever, and we're seeing more of that. But I think Westminster's a sort of miserable place at the moment because of Brexit. You know, the Tories are divided, but actually Labour are even more divided. So it's frustrating to watch the entire Parliament heading towards this cliff edge. You know, it's like watching something fall and nobody's making a move to catch it. And that's bizarre to see all of that energy that is allowing this to go over a cliff edge. And if you look at the way the government have been spinning things over the summer, talking about stockpiling medicines, food shortages, now those things are a danger of no deal, and indeed a danger of a hard Brexit, a Canada deal. But it's not normal for a government to talk about them. Government would normally be saying things like, we'll be fine, don't worry, it's all in hand. And I think they're just trying to make it socially unacceptable for any MP to vote against whatever deal they get, no matter how bad it is.
Yeah, so watch this space.
Yeah, unfortunately.
You touched on the NHS earlier on. I was at a meeting recently, and the person was talking about that the NHS has never been one NHS, and I think a lot of people have always thought that it's just been a national thing, whereas actually, if I'm right in saying the Scottish NHS was born before the rest of it, we're 5 years older than...
we're not 5 years older, but we were ready to go the year before. Okay. But the principle is based on something even older, which is the Highlands and Islands Medical Scheme, which was actually born in 1913. So the principle of having this kind of shared approach to healthcare existed in Scotland decades before. But you're absolutely right. Scottish NHS was always separate. It was a separate Act of Parliament, and we had the England and Wales NHS, the Scottish and the one in Northern Ireland, and then Wales separated out in about 2006, I think. But obviously until devolution, our policies were still driven from Westminster. So when we had Mrs. Thatcher, we still had trusts, we still had purchaser-provider split, GPs kind of buying healthcare from hospitals, and all the wasted energy around that. Of course, after devolution, we then turned on our heel and we got rid of trusts, we got rid of primary care trusts, and it's actually a health board that tries to manage healthcare in an integrated fashion. And of course, now we're working on integrating health and social care, which is an even bigger challenge, where in England they have gone in a completely different direction. Obviously the Health and Social Care Act, built on changes actually brought in by Labour to bring private companies in. And Tony Blair used to talk about a vision where 40% of healthcare would be delivered by private companies. So this is not just a Tory thing. This has been running for a long time. And we've been able to escape that because of devolution. So there are people who don't yet believe in independence for Scotland, but yet they recognise the advantages that we've had of devolution. But our healthcare, our NHS legalistically has always been separate, and now obviously it's managed separately as well.
Okay. Maureen, do you keep an eye out in all the party conferences?
I'm not. I think a lot of Scotland has become more political, and I think we enjoyed it. I think what's happening just now is quite frightening to the man in the street, the woman in the street. And sometimes you want to bury your head in the sand because it doesn't seem to be getting anywhere. You know, we've been working to get somewhere for a long while. We don't have any tangible answers. So yes, I think also the older you get, the more involved you become in what's happening in your country, and you know, people that are standing up for you. But for me, I think it is quite a frightening time all round, because no one knows what's going to happen. So I think it would be good to have a crystal ball and kind of figure out what's going to happen next year and see, you know, if we're going to have success or not. But yeah, I think Scotland are very fortunate that they do have quite a highly motivated society now in terms of politics. We are quite interested in what happens in our country.
And I think we're lucky to have lots of young people who are switched on to what's happening politically, and they're much more aware, which I think is no matter who you're voting for, that's a fantastic way to be, because you want the future, the future of our country
well, I
to
think
be.
it's critical that people vote. I mean, obviously in Scotland, our young people get the vote at 16. And I would actually like to see schools allowing that to come through the door. Sometimes schools are very defensive about allowing anything political in. Now, if you're having politicians, of course it has to be evenly balanced, but you can equally have the young people themselves debating on behalf of different parties and discussing policies. But if they get the vote at 16, the chances are they will vote in something before they leave school. And once you've voted, there's much greater chance you'll go on doing that, particularly if you have been engaged in the subject of that. Because what we see is, if you look, older people vote much more than younger people. And while people think it's just you suddenly reach an age where you start voting, it's actually not. It's the different cohorts are dropping down. And in 2015, only, I think, 43% of 18 to 24-year-olds in England voted. Now, if you imagine the percentage that a governing party might get of that, it might only be, 30%. So you could have a country ruled with a majority on 15% of the electorate, if once they are the main, the main cohort. That's very frightening, because that becomes easy to manipulate. So we need to get over the importance of voting, regardless of how you choose to vote.
I think for so long, I'm going back to being, a wee girl. For so long, it was something you didn't discuss, because people, you didn't know what their preference was in terms of who they were going to vote for. It was a sort of no debate subject within families, within households, and I think that's changing. And I also think where Scotland wins is we are working towards being a totally inclusive society, which is something I'm really proud to be part of. So, to bring young people in, to listen to young people, to listen to all our minorities, is going to be much better for us as a country going forward.
Absolutely.
And I think we also have to support those communities to be part of politics, not even just to vote, but to actually be members of our Scottish Parliament, members of the Parliament in Westminster. Part of the fight to have more women in Parliament is, yes, we're not just interested in women's issues, but we will look at other issues from a woman's point of view, and that gives that different point of view. And that means we need, ethnic communities. We also need people of disability, and we need to include everyone. Or else the problem is decisions can be made, and we've certainly seen this, without any recognition of how it might affect. So it's not even deliberate. It's just not thinking. Whereas if you have those voices in a parliament, you're much more likely to get that viewpoint.
I think that reflects through society and actually globally as well. That's the way we have to go forward, is inclusion and listen to people.
I think you're right, Maureen. In terms of democracy, for a healthy democracy, there needs to be a conversation. People need to be able to talk about things and find out the information so that you can make an informed choice about something, and I think that's important. Sticking with women, Maureen, you're involved in women in sport, and there was a debate in the Scottish Parliament last week about the barriers facing women getting involved in sport and physical activity, and obviously there was a launch of a fund to try and help projects to boost that. Apart from the financial issues, and you might want to talk about that as well, but what is stopping women and girls participating in sport, in your opinion?
Well, I think there's so many different factors, and it depends on the individual. You look at young girls, it can be body images, because if they're going to look in magazines or they're going to look on television or whatever, they look at YouTube, whatever, the body images they're seeing are sometimes not real body images. There's pressure put on them. They want to look good all the time. They think being involved in sport means they don't look good, which is actually the opposite. It can be that, it can be the environment, it can be their home circumstances. Women are still the majority carers, whether it be for their parents or whether it be for children. Do they have the time to participate in sport and physical activity? And women put themselves last. And what they don't realise is that to make that little bit of extra time, to have that bit of me time, to be a bit physically active, they're going to be much better in themselves, able to cope with all the things that women have to deal with. So I think that there's just not one easy answer. That's a problem. And of course we don't have a media that really supports the success of women in sport. So young girls aren't reading about it, they're reading about other things which really are not real.
Do you feel anyway there's an appetite for women to get involved? Is that something that women are becoming more aware of, and is it growing?
Yes, it's wonderful. I really enjoy it because, again, it's women standing up for women. It's saying this is not acceptable. It's women actually realising their worth. Particularly in sitting on boards. We need a lot of women on the boards of sporting organisations to give us what we were speaking about beforehand, this kind of understanding of every aspect. So it's nice to see that there is a movement that's going to change that. I mean, women in sport at the moment is really a hot topic, and there are changes left, right and centre. I sit on the Scottish Government's Women Advisory Board, and we are working hard to look at recommendations going forward to Scottish Government that will help to affect change as well. In my own organisation, Scottish Women in Sport, we work hard to raise a profile and increase awareness, and we're having our it's our 5th annual dinner where we recognise the success. We have a Sportswoman of the Year. We have 8 awards that we present, and that again is because you look around at all the other sporting awards and yes, we speak about equity, but if you're not hearing about the success of women, you can't put them forward to gain the awards. So we make sure that we have women at the forefront of this, and it's a wonderful night, and some great stories come out of it.
Do you think there's still a stigma around that sports for boys?
You mean in terms of girls thinking that it's a boys?
Yeah. And not even girls, but just in general, a public perception that really sports is just a man thing, it's for boys.
I don't know. I think it is changing, and I think it's changing because young girls are making it change, and also dads. Lots of dads are wanting their daughters to have the same opportunities. We have got a different mindset now, so I think lots of people are seeing the changes. But I do think in terms of a career choice, where parents would support a young boy perhaps going into football or boxing or whatever, golf, where you can make a lot of money, they perhaps don't see the same end result for the girls. So maybe it's not just as important, but that's changing as well. We're looking at Scottish Women's National Team, which has had some funding there. I worked in football for 20 years, and I remember the days when I started off, we fundraised to send the team to play abroad. Now it's different, and I never thought through my 20 years working for women's football we would ever see women get paid to play football. I didn't expect that to happen. We've got a national squad now, of which I think only 4 are not currently full-time footballers, albeit the majority of them playing football outside Scotland, because Scotland's businesses are not supporting women in sport. So maybe it's a wee shout out to them to get some investment, because the time's ripe. We're going to the World Cup next year. We can't do much better than that.
Absolutely. I was going to say to you is do you think all that you've said there impacts on the kind of level of sponsorship that's out there? If it's not recognised the same and people don't think there's the same value, does that mean that you're not getting the sponsorship the same?
I think there is a vicious circle, but I think we have found a way to break into it. Currently at Scottish Women in Sport, we've just undergone a strategy review, and we're going to focus in 3 areas, and one of these areas is going to be an inclusion report. So we're going to actually be able to monitor the changes that happen on a year-to-year basis. We'll be able to put this information out so people will be able to see whether we're making progress or not. But we're still struggling. We've got papers sitting in front of us. Now I would say to you, turn to the back pages and find me something about women's sport. You'll struggle. And until we get, I've got a board member that says to me it's not important. We've got social media, it's a great vehicle. But in terms of getting society, and if the majority of men are picking up the paper and we want to take them with us, they've got to be reading about it as well. So we've got to break down the barriers across the board for women in sport. And I actually think we're going to do it. And I'm a wee bit optimistic, having said that we would probably never make a World Cup, we'd never have paid footballers, but we have. I think we'll do it this time.
I think the women going to the World Cup is probably the best opportunity that we've had to break into that.
Yes.
Because it'll give the Tartan Army and all the Scottish football supporters an opportunity to be at a World Cup and to support the team. And I think the skill that they'll see on the pitch from the women players, I think they'll be surprised at. And I think, we have seen a change within tennis. I think we have seen a change within Olympics and so on, that there is more media coverage of the upper echelons of female sport than we had before. But football was still very much relegated, if you'll excuse the pun. And I think I've noticed that change, even occasionally breaking into the back pages. And I think the problem is young women do need role models up to a certain point. If there's a profession, I mean, when I started in surgery, there were no women surgeons, senior surgeons in Scotland. I was told as a medical student I couldn't be a surgeon because I was a woman, and you look and there are no women. It can become very easy to think that's not something for me. So I think the more we're seeing that, I think that is inspiring. But it's then also bringing it back to the grassroots. So having community access, school access for girls when they're young to play football. That's the only way we're going to grow future teams. And I think the other thing is remembering people who will never be elite sports people. You talked about, women always putting themselves last. And that's an issue that's absolutely a discussion I used to have with my breast cancer patients. You're way down here, but you have to see that on behalf of your family, you need to put yourself to the top, because this is the challenge at the moment. And we need to look at when our classes run, when are our swimming pools open, when are things happening? Is that suitable for women to use them? Because some of it will be simple organisational barriers, cost barriers. In schools, it can't just be about the hockey team. Are we running Zumba classes that might attract the other girls? So we need to really be making sure we're reaching out so that we have people who are interested in fitness, people who are interested in sport for fun, and then it's through that actually you will come across the elite talent, and do we have a pathway for them?
Perfectly put. What I would say with you, in terms of role models, this is something we've been looking at a lot. I'd like to find a different name, because, to me, a role model isn't the elite athlete, because sometimes that can be off-putting for the young girls that they don't want to have to train 4 times a week and not see their friends and don't have the odd bag of chips or whatever, because role models are your mum, your sister, your aunt, that go out and do it and have fun doing it. So I think it'd be nice to think of a different terminology for what we currently think of as a role model. But everything you said there, I totally agree with you, and I do think that the change is about to come, and the work that we're doing hopefully will enhance that and perhaps also accelerate it.
But that's why I think you need those, if you like, community teams, community leagues, where it is about fun. And then by chance you will spot these people who have that natural talent. If it's only about you're going to the gym to not be fat, or you're an elite sports person, there's no path, there's no bridge that people can cross, because you're not going to necessarily have 7-8-year-old girls who are thinking, right, okay, that's my entire drive. It'll be that they play in their primary school team and then maybe their secondary school team, and then someone says, actually you're a great striker or a great goalie, would you like to come forward? So we actually have to have all the steps of sport.
Prior to the debate, obviously it was Women and Girls in Sports Week, and again social media highlighted all the different sports. And for me, I think one of the unknown success stories in Scotland is that we're world champions at tug of war. Our women are the world champions.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and it's only about 3 weeks ago they went to South Africa. They come from Ayrshire.
Gosh, we should know.
Well, there you are. So the platform that we have given them has been great. And in your mind, your perception, you think tug of war, well, that's something you just turn up to. But these girls are absolute athletes, because if you miss training for 2 nights, you're losing an awful lot of your strength. So we have lots of success stories. We've got an ice hockey team down in Dumfries. They have to play down in the English League because there's no other ice hockey teams. There are stories left, right and centre. We've got a young lady, Molly Hughes, going out to Kilimanjaro. She's already climbed it twice, and she's taken school pupils with her. There's so many good stories, so many women doing some great things that, it's a lovely environment to be working in at the moment. Yeah.
Going back quite a few years, I played a few games with a ladies cricket team in Ayr, and the only other ladies team we could play against was Fruki. So you had to travel all that way. So I'm glad that things have definitely moved on. You mentioned a couple of things, 2 things together, body image and social media. And while social media is a great avenue for getting your message out, I think in terms of the body image stuff and the fact that everything's filtered and altered, and I think that's a real tension around young women and boys as well. That they're trying to look like something, and if you're trying to get them into a sport or whatever, I think there's a tension there.
I mean, to be fair, images were altered in magazines for years. I mean, I think that's a bigger
even Weight
problem.
Watchers.
Yeah, well, that's surprising.
I remember having been to Weight Watchers many times, and being a doctor, I could see that someone's hip was not a natural shape, and when I said to the leader, I said, really, has that image been altered? And she said, oh yeah, they've always done that. So here they are saying, here's this person who's lost all this weight, you could do it too, and it's a photoshopped image.
And I think for me, social media, the young people who use it know that these things are filtered because they do it themselves. Whereas you pick up a magazine, you don't really, I think the perception's different, and sometimes we're talking about some of our biggest stars, and that's who they want to be like. And then if you see them in real life, you know, they've got spots, they're carrying fat, they've got cellulite, they've got everything because they're human. And so I do think magazines are actually probably a bigger problem to me than social media.
I think also, though, I mean, talking about body image, you know, things like when sport classes would be. I mean, you know, the lunch break, particularly in winter when, you know, we often have rotten weather, you know, is there a gym in a secondary school? Is there a Zumba class? But then girls are going to want to have access to showers to freshen up. You know, the idea of spending the afternoon kind of a bit sweaty and untidy is something that a lot of young, you know, the boys maybe don't care, but the girls might. So it's having to think about all sorts of different angles, because I think there's lots of little barriers that unless we're talking to them and listening to them, we're not going to find out why is it you're not doing sport.
And I think a lot of the schools now, you know, we have quite a good stock of schools now, and they do have, I believe, hair straighteners and hair dryers and everything there. So I think that is really good for young girls, but also I think we have to understand that they want something different out of it. So they would maybe go to a class and they want the first 15 minutes to have a chat and a catch up. So let's have that. Let's have the social media, the catch up, the chat, and then get down to it. So people have to realise that the approach is different, has to be welcoming, and it has to be fun. Yeah.
I think the fun is crucial.
Yes.
And I think there's an obvious link, Philippa, between physical activity and health.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, obviously the pressure on all 4 UK health services, we're getting older, which is a great thing. I mean, when people talk about, you know, the challenge, the calamity of an ageing population, I do kind of remind people that what the alternative to living longer actually is. It's living shorter, so not exactly a great solution. But what we've not learnt yet is how to age well. And unfortunately, you know, you might hit 50 or 40 and start thinking, oh, I need to look after myself. But in actual fact, a lot of it is laid down in childhood and early childhood. So I'm delighted to see things like outdoor nurseries that encourage our children to be, you know, running around in the garden or the woods or whatever. And I think that's why it is so important that we start thinking about how we design things. How do we design our town centres? Is it all about the car, how the car drives and where the car parks? Or is it actually about wider pavements, cycling paths, room for children to be on scooters as they go to school? You know, it's not just in the department marked health. It's actually right across government. We need to be thinking, how do we make our kids more active? How do we keep them active? How do we keep them interested? And equally, how do we provide that for people who are busy bringing up kids or busy working, right through to our older citizens? And then we all have that responsibility to interact with that, to use the facilities provided. But sport is crucial, and that's why it can never just be about the elite team. Oh, isn't that great? We're going to the World Cup. You know, that's a small team of women who are involved in that and who are around that. That itself doesn't change the fitness of Scotland. It has to be that we've got kids in primary 5 going, wow, that's brilliant, I want to learn to play football. That's where you change it, right down at the bottom of the pyramid.
I think one of the success stories is the Daily Mile. I don't know if you're aware of that.
Very aware of it. I boast about it in Westminster all the time.
Well, we also have an annual conference, and we had Elaine Wiley speak at our conference, I think, maybe 2 years ago. And, you know, Elaine's very, very shy, retiring person, doesn't understand the whole fuss, and are you sure you want me to speak here? And honestly, everyone thought it was amazing. It was so simple, which is great because that's the best ideas, and it's now been rolled out throughout the place and throughout the world. Other countries abroad taking it. So if we can instill that kind of thing, the fitness and the appetite and enjoying being outdoors, it can translate into sport.
Well, I've noticed it in Troon has a 10k that's very well subscribed and oversubscribed, and it's always had a kind of bit of a children's race at the beginning, but that has really increased in size because the children are doing it anyway, and suddenly now they want to take part in a competition and actually go and have a run, and you see that they're really putting their heart and soul into it. So yes, I mean, it gets mentioned quite regularly, and I was standing born in Scotland.
So Maureen, finally, how would women get involved in sport?
I think there's lots of opportunities for women to get involved in sport. If they've got a specific sport, they can go on a website. And this is not just for young girls. There's for, we've got a lot of walking football now. We've got bounce back to netball for women who, maybe had a career break and going back into career and thinking I want to get fit as well. So I would think just do a little bit of Googling. I think we all know how to Google nowadays. But if anyone's got any problems they want to contact me, I'm happy for them to do so. ScottishWomenInSport@gmail.com, and I'll try and point them in the right direction.
Okay, thank you, Maureen. Moving on now, ladies, obviously big in the news has been the Kavanaugh seat being confirmed with the Supreme Court, and obviously there was protests in America as a result of that. In terms of women's rights, what do you think's the implications for the women in America, Philippa?
I mean, part of it is the fact that he's been confirmed. The fact that we had this farce of a 1 week long FBI investigation. I mean, they haven't found enough corroborated evidence, therefore it's okay in 1 week. I mean, that to me, that's just a sham. I also felt that some of how he behaved during the hearings would have suggested to me that he, for even other reasons, was not absolutely the right person to be a Supreme Court judge, which is for life. This is a kind of irrevocable situation, but it's also how it's all been handled. The media reaction around it, the way Trump was attacking Christine Blasey Ford at a rally where you're just whipping up aggression and she has no voice of reply. I think, unfortunately, how this has spilled out into everything else, despite the Me Too movement of the last year or so, sends an appalling message out to women in America, and indeed that then reverberates around the world. It's still the fact that if you come forward, you will be attacked, you will be mocked, you will be humiliated, and therefore there will be lots of women who, unless they have witnesses, and how often do we have another witness to a sexual assault or rape? Very rarely. Then people are just going to keep quiet, and they're just going to carry that kind of pain and the ramifications around with them.
I think it's a dreadful decision, and I think it's not just women who find it dreadful. I mean, there are many men out there who support the women who are currently rallying against this. And what I can't understand is, such a strong position, a position for life, such an important role. Why would you not want to ensure? They haven't ensured that this is the correct decision, that this man is completely exonerated of what he has been accused of. Time is not a barrier. You would rather have found out whether it was right or wrong, and they haven't done this. And I think it's this quick fix, and to me this is a joke, and I feel really very, very sorry for women in the future, because that's what's going to stop them coming forward. To have the president of your country actually mock you, I think that's an absolutely shameful situation, and I do think they have my sympathy.
And I think it seems to have come down to simply a very partisan and political decision, instead of actually recognising, in America the Supreme Court interpret law, and therefore they're absolutely crucial to how law goes forward in America. It's clear that Brett Kavanaugh is a conservative, and therefore there are aspects of how he will make decisions. But you are always going to have that suspicion that when he would be interpreting law that brushed onto any of these issues around women's rights, women's power, protection from sexual harassment, assault, etc., that there's always going to be that discomfort there. Will he give it a body swerve, or will he take a particular stance, or will he tend to be protecting the men instead of protecting the women? That suspicion is going to be there, and they haven't got rid of it. And it all seemed to be no, it's a political decision, we need to make it by Saturday. Yeah. That's it. And I agree, time should not have been the barrier.
And the fact that, he's only there by 2 votes, I mean, I can't understand why 50-50 is fine. To me, it should have been a majority plus, before you can take someone through so that everyone's comfortable with the decision. So there's something seems wrong to me in the way that this is carried through, particularly when he's appointed by someone we know himself, should he have gone for that position, would have deemed a lot of investigation and not have been there. So it's a bit like the Old Boys Network, the Old Boys Club.
But when you think of the stuff that came out about Trump himself, I mean, including that recording of what he was saying about how he could just grab women, and the fact that he was wealthy and powerful meant he could treat them how he liked. I was shocked that being there, his voice saying it, not rumour, not hearsay, an actual recording of some of the things he said, and yet he still went on to be elected as President of the United States.
With a lot of women supporters.
It's a very, very worrying situation, I think. I mean, I think the politics, we're worried about the politics here, but it's also the politics in America, the politics in Russia. I mean, it is a scary time, but when you're losing any sense of decency within a president, not just power but actual social decency, I think that's really concerning.
Well, we're looking at a culture change in Scotland. We're looking at our diversity and inclusion, and we're looking at going forward and changing it. In America, it's the opposite. Their culture is going back. It must be quite a worrying time for people who are not of the same mind than Kavanagh and Trump to be in there, because it seems to be a roller coaster and it seems to be gathering momentum all the time.
Well, it is. I mean, it's almost back to the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant original founders of America, and yet the strength of America has always been that it was a country of immigrants. It was based on people who had the gumption, if you like, to not just stay where they were and suffer whatever it was they were suffering, but to actually get up, get on a boat, go through all the dangers of that and build themselves a new life. And that is where the energy of America came. And now suddenly, depending on where you're coming from, we won't take these people, we won't take those people, you're not allowed in, you're not even allowed to come on holiday. So it's bizarre for a country that is literally built on that, the energy you get from people who emigrate and then immigrate, if you like, to suddenly have this very closed, we're building a wall here, we're shutting you out. If you come from a Muslim country, we're not taking you. And I think all of that will damage the fabric of American society in the future.
And I think what was really concerning as well is the number of women that appeared to get arrested for protesting. So if you don't have an avenue for your voice to be heard, and the only option is if you do that, you potentially be arrested, then it makes it a very scary place for people's voices to be heard.
But I think that's what it is all about. It's all about power and shutting down dissent. Trump seems to have this very narrow vision of what he thinks America should be, and he's not willing to deviate from that. He's not willing to be open to anything. Everything has to be precisely what he says it should be. I mean, he has it's almost a kind of I'm the king of America sort of approach to politics.
And obviously, in terms of trying to get more women involved and more women for equality for women, I think I worry that there's women out there fighting for equality and the cause, but really, unless we get men on board, I suppose the analogy, and it's no pun, is like we're playing a football match with half a team, because unless the men get on board, and it's maybe as well about how we bring up our young men, our boys, it needs to be a wider than just women fighting for rights. It's got to be more global, I think.
Well, I think even starting at the most extreme end around things like domestic abuse, domestic abuse or sexual harassment or sexual assault are not actually women's issues, they're men's issues. And it's men that you absolutely have to get on board. I think that's the importance of the White Ribbon Group, obviously, which is about men standing up against abuse of women. Obviously, our colleague Gavin Newlands is very active in that in Westminster. And it is trying to get families, I mean, you talked about, Maureen, fathers backing their daughters to be, sports people and to be active. It's also having fathers who actually want their sons to be good men and to grow up to be good men. And it does mean that I think some of these discussions about, what is abuse, what is beyond the line, what is respect, actually have to start coming down into school. When they're doing sexual education or whatever, a lot of that has to be about relationship. I mean, obviously there was a lot of discussion earlier about the upskirting photos and the fact that private members bill in Westminster was blocked by one of the elderly filibustering MPs that Corri will know them well. But it's trying to actually get young boys to realise that is just unacceptable, as opposed to, isn't that fun? Look at what I did and I've put it on Facebook. And simply because you can doesn't mean it's okay. So I think a lot of these discussions have to come down to where we have a lot of adult and young person interaction in schools, and even things like within sport. Sport only works if you're respecting the other members on your team, and even if you're respecting your opponent. If it's a solo sport like golf, it's actually your own integrity. Did you see the ball move? Did you move it a little bit? Did you flatten the grass? Whatever. So there's a lot of, if you like, moral code in sport that you can connect with a general way of treating people. And I think that's quite a good way to be kind of bringing some of this to our young men. But we actually have to be bringing it to our boys, because they're the young men of the future.
Yeah.
Well, I think, again, using sport, I do see a huge difference in the attitude of the younger men coming through, much more accepting of women playing sport. I worked with the University of West of Scotland recently in a project we did, Girls Do Sport, and we filmed a lot of the 9 different sports, and the majority of the students were male, but they were fascinated by the fact that women were participating. They weren't treating them any different. So yes, I think if we can use what we know to take men with us, I think it's an imperative in order to get change. We can't do it just on our own, and it's not about doing it just on our own, because it's not just about us, it's about society, and society is about men and women, girls and boys. So let's all work together to get the right thing happening.
Absolutely. The Sunday Herald today runs on the story of Katie Mackay, who allegedly was assaulted and stalked. Now, our perpetrator, it's inferred that he had mental health issues. I think, obviously, while we don't know the full ins and outs of it all, there definitely seems to be questions around just how this was handled in terms of process.
Well, this isn't a story that I had seen before coming up this morning. And obviously we always have difficulties where you have criminality carried out by someone who has a mental health issue. But obviously there are processes that have to go through, and that includes the assessment of the person who is the perpetrator. We know now, and obviously we have a lot more law around stalking, we know that is something that can actually destroy somebody's life by creating fear and intimidation. And obviously, men and women have to be protected from that. I clearly don't know the details of the case to comment in that sense, but there still has to be a process whereby people are protected, even if in the end of the day someone requires treatment rather than imprisonment. That is a very individual decision to be made. We have forensic psychiatrists who actually make those assessments. I don't think that assessment should be being made off the cuff at the beginning of, we're not going to bother doing this, or we're not going to look into it, or we're not going to take action. You still have to protect people from stalking. Obviously, we've had people who were injured or even killed. The Dando case, from a stalker. It's not something that can be ignored, and therefore there has to be a process to follow.
Well, I think, should what's contained in the article, should that be factual? I think there's a great deal to worry about here. It's the assumption that because someone wasn't physically harmed, that there's no harm done. But it's, where do you start? If you've got a perpetrator who is getting away with something, what do they do at the next stage? Does that become more and more? So it's about prevention, I think. So it's about taking time. And in terms of police work, perhaps if more was done around the prevention, it would be better for us all. So as it stands, if what we're reading does happen to be fact, I think there's a lot to worry about in this particular case. And I agree with you totally in terms of stalking. That's a crime which invades someone's space, invades their head, and I think must be very, very... You can recover from a physical injury. Trying to recover from something like that in your head must be very difficult, because you never know who or when it's going to happen again.
But I think it's the fact that if it is stalking, it is generally ongoing. Touching again on the domestic abuse situation, there are many women who are subject to psychological abuse and control and coercion, who will say that they find that harder than the fact that on a Saturday night they get a black eye, because the black eye will heal. The other one is all the time. They're always on tenterhooks. They're always frightened. Well, if you have that situation that either if you go out at all or if you go to a certain place, this person is stalking you, or they're stalking you online, they're invading all your social media, you can't get away from them. It's these kind of psychological attacks that are ongoing that I think are a real threat. I mean, we see it with bullying. If there was someone at school bullying you, when you got on the bus and went home, you were free. Now they can bully you through your social media and attack you all the time. Well, that applies the same among adults with stalking, and I think it is a crime that has to be taken seriously.
Absolutely. Going back to conferences, obviously we had the Tory conference and Theresa showing us her dance skills. Do you think, Philippa, that was perhaps a smokescreen to divert away from the content of her speech?
Well, I think it was an attempt to show, kind of self-humour, recognising that obviously people had been laughing at her dancing attempts when she was in Africa, which were certainly no better than the one on stage. But, I mean, the content of her speech was almost nothing. I mean, most of it was platitudes, other than her comment about, austerity is over. And if you saw the rictus on the face of the Chancellor, I wonder, did she actually clear that with him? Because austerity isn't remotely over. I mean, there are more social security cuts that have still to feed through. We still have a benefit freeze that will go on into the next decade. So people are getting poorer. I mean, talking about things like universal credit, recognising that there are people who are going to get poorer still than they are now, and for her to stand up and simply declare, I mean, that was really the only meaty thing in her whole speech, was saying austerity is over, and that's just laughable. And I thought, as we face Brexit, including an over-the-cliff Brexit, having the slogan opportunity for this conference was, frankly derisory. What opportunity? Mm-hmm. They're taking opportunities away from people, away from our young people who at the moment can work in any one of 31 countries. And at the end of all of this mess, they'll be able to work in the UK and Ireland, and that'll be the height of it. What we're facing is loss of opportunity. And through poverty, we lose, that's where people lose lots of opportunity. You talked about, Maureen, that, the inhibitor that can be to engage in sport, to engage in social or cultural events, but also to have the opportunities to develop yourself. So I just thought the whole thing was a sham. I thought it was vacuous, and as I say, the single point that she made about austerity was just laughable. That's why I asked if it was a smokescreen, in terms of all AMD was talking about in social media was the dancing. Nobody was talking about her speech. Well, I suppose that's true. I mean, they are very big on distraction, and I think having that slogan opportunity and then her appearing to do a victory dance is trying to put out, everything's great and look at the success we're having. But I mean, it's very much whited sepulchre. The Conservative Party is tearing itself apart on the inside, and unfortunately all of the Brexit nonsense has been about the Tory party right back from David Cameron promising a referendum to try and see off UKIP in 2015, right through. All of this has always been about them, and actually under that kind of veneer of here we are in our big conference and isn't it great, they are literally eating each other up.
I think there's something uncomfortable about seeing somebody dancing and joyous, given the fact that there's lots of people throughout the country that are living in misery as a result of their policies.
And the fact that misery will continue. And some of it, people have not all been moved on to universal credit that are going to be. We're still, actually at a minority setting. And if you start to dig into it, you find that there are all sorts of cohorts who are going to lose some of the very little money they already have. So, poverty is increasing. Poverty, if you look at the charts that came out, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation report that came out very recently, and you see that poverty in all groups had been coming down for the last 10-15 years, and starting in about 2012 there's an uptick. It's not starting at the crash in 2008. It's actually starting with the first Welfare Act in 2012, and then there was another one in 2016, as you know yourself, and groups like the disabled, lone parents, they got a double hit in both of those. So we're seeing a lot more children in poverty, we're seeing a lot more suffering, but the problem is their representatives are not sitting in that conference. Most of them are not voting Conservative, so they simply don't care about them. I mean, after 3 years on the green benches, you do realise there's an awful lot of people in government who don't actually care about the ordinary person in the street. And that is the damage that's actually being done.
Did you catch any of it, Maureen?
I did. I mean, and this is we shock Corri. I did have some slight sympathy with Theresa May in the first instance in Africa, because you're abroad, you're representing your country, and you're not sure. Maybe it's you go to New Zealand to the Hack, or you go somewhere. So I felt that did she feel she had to do this to show her friendliness towards the country? It was dreadful. It was embarrassing. It was awful. So I had some sympathy there. But to recreate it a couple of days ago, I thought whoever was advising her, really, it's not endearing her to anyone. She's not looking like one of us because she's dancing and she's making a joke. So it left me feeling pretty cold and pretty embarrassed that she should do that. She's the leader, and she's coming on. I mean, let's be fair, she's not going to make an Ed Balls out of it, is she? And he was bad enough.
It was like the most excruciating version of dad dancing that you've seen.
Yes.
And it's very rare that when your dad would get up and join in a disco that you'd been proud of them. I mean, I found it fairly toe curling.
But I also find it fascinating to now look at the back of it, from the discussion that you're both having here. So that's interesting, and that's something that gets my wheels in motion.
Okay, ladies, that's all we've got time for this week. And I just wanted to mention about the Broadcasting Scotland report on the Independence March. They were there yesterday, so that special report will be coming out. So thank you to Maureen and Philippa for attending today. For more information about Broadcasting Scotland and our programmes, you can visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot. While you're there, you can also subscribe for £5 a month, which allows us to keep making the programmes. Look out for Scotland at 7 throughout the week on Broadcasting Scotland, and the full Scottish will be back again next Sunday afternoon. Thanks for watching and hope to see you next weekend. Enjoy the rest of this weekend.